Welcome to Beyond the Fine Print, the podcast where we help you simplify the ever-evolving world of commercial laws and technology and answer the major questions facing lawyers today. I'm your host, Rory O'Keefe, and in each episode, we'll be breaking through the jargon so you can stay ahead, keep it cool, and take control back. Now let's get started. Today, I am super excited to have our star guest, Dr. Heidi Gardner, who is a true force in the world of collaboration and leadership. Now, my in-house lawyers and listeners out there, my, as we've coined it, our fine friends, this is where you lean in, because Heidi's work speaks directly to the challenge so many of us face, moving beyond being seen as technical experts or the Department of No, and stepping into the role of strategic collaborators who shape the direction of a business. She's a distinguished fellow of Harvard Law School Center on Legal Profession, former professor of Harvard Business School and a Fulbright Fellow. She's advised boards, executive teams across industries on how to break down silos, foster innovation, and deliver stronger business outcomes through what she calls smarter collaboration. She's also the co-founder of Gardner Co, a research and advisory firm that helps leaders embed collaboration into strategy and culture. Her books, wait for it, Smart Collaboration, and its follow-up, Smarter Collaboration, are Washington Post bestsellers, translated into multiple languages, widely cited for their practical insights. And she's written more than 100 scholarly articles, book chapters, case studies, and research that has earned awards from Academy of Management and recognition from Thinkers 50 as the next generation business guru. And if that wasn't enough, before her academic career, Heidi worked at McKinsey, Procter & Gamble, lived and worked on 4 continents, holds degrees from the University of Pennsylvania, London School of Economics, and just up the road from me, the London Business School, where she earned her PhD. So in short, when it comes to understanding how professionals can stop tripping over silos and start working smarter together, Heidi is the real deal. And her frameworks show how legal teams can build trust, create value, and become indispensable partners at the leadership table. And let's be honest, if you've ever been in a meeting where everyone's guarding their turf like it's the last biscuit of a board retreat, you'll know exactly why her message matters. So Heidi combines this rigor of Harvard research with the kind of practical wisdom that makes you think, why didn't anybody tell me this sooner? So buckle up. This episode is about how in-house lawyers can stop playing defense, start shaping strategy, and dare I say it, become the collaborators every CEO secretly wishes they had. Heidi, welcome to Beyond the Fine Print.
Well, goodness, I'm not sure I can live up to that intro, but I'm going to do my best today, Rory.
Please, 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 please. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for giving us a little bit of time in what is, I know, extremely busy schedule that you have. But I want to go straight in. Start with the big one. In-house lawyers, like myself, are often seen as people who say no, the human equivalent of the pop-up blocker, or in my terminology, the deal blocker. But your work shows how collaboration can flip the narrative. What practical steps help lawyers reposition themselves as growth enablers, and how can they make that shift visible to the business?
So there are a number of ways that we could tackle this. Let me really quickly dive into a framework that I think helps us unpack it, which we call the vectors of collaboration. You know, if you remember physics intro courses, a vector is a line with direction and magnitude, and it plays into collaboration because you need to be thinking about which direction are you reaching out, or which direction are people reaching out to you from? And the magnitude bit is how much collaboration goes on, how much should go on. I talk about this because the vectors of collaboration for in-house lawyers are many. They include collaboration within the legal team, with other functions and departments, with what I think of as the sort of the frontline business, whether that is literally on the front line, or it could be up through the C-suite and even the board. Or it's the fourth vector we talk about outside. And that could be trade associations. It could be working collaboratively with external counsel, et cetera. And I think it's important for us to pull it apart because the nature of the challenges and the nature of the benefits for collaboration along each of those vectors is different. Right? So let's start with working on collaborating with the business. And whether that's, C-suite or higher, or whether it's direct business partners, I think a word you mentioned early is absolutely vital: trust. So A lot of the business people I work with who are not lawyers themselves feel like they've gotten their fingers burnt at one point or another by confiding in somebody in the in-house legal team who squashed a project, shut down an idea, intervened in a way that actually could have been incredibly valuable for the business, but felt like a personal affront to that business individual. And so building trust with the business is a necessary first step. Not that they tend to question one's technical legal expertise, but rather they question your intentions. So whenever we're talking about collaboration, we talk about competence trust and character trust. They're not doubting your competence. They're trusting the character side. What are your intentions? Why are you intervening, et cetera? And so that trust building is crucial. What can you do about it? Well, one of the things is to make very transparent the why behind your reactions. So aligning your decisions, if you have to say no, how does that link to strategy? Making sure there's a shared goal there. We all want to protect the company from XYZ, whatever the risk is. Here's why I think that's, a real challenge in this case. Ideally, it's coming with the yes and, as opposed to the no. Yes, I see why this is crucial for you. And I think we need to put some wrappers on it to protect ourselves. So the yes and is a much better, provided it's genuine and you're truly solving the problem there, that's a much more palatable response. I think along with this, some really simple tactics can help. For example, learning and using the language that the business partners use. Semantics matter, right? If I come into the legal arena and I start talking, in a law firm, if I were to start talking about customers and employees rather than clients and partners, they'd kick me out instantly, right? Total organ rejection. And it's the same way that a lot of the business people feel when they're talking to their in-house legal team and don't get the sense that those people have taken the time and have the respect for learning the business lingo, the strategy, and are fluent in the way that the business people operate.
It's interesting when you say the yes and, because I always say there's a difference between yes and yes but. I think we used to in the past, it's hard because you can fall into the trap of saying, yes, you can do that, but you need to talk about these things. They only hear after the but.
Yeah.
So yes and is a softer way of telling, yes, you can do that, and we'll see you in criminal court because that's fraud, which I had to do at one point to a very senior person long time ago. Different story for a different day. But it does allow for it to land better. And I think it's interesting because I talk to lawyers, and I myself was trained in the way, and you talk about vectors and connectors. We're not just risk managers. And the way to do it is to look at it from you're linking compliance, commercials, and operational thinking together. And I really like how you say yes, and also use their language. It's kind of like from a lot of people who look from cultural sensitivity training that they may have done in the past. You have to be able to converse in their language in order to influence them effectively. And if you become that trusted advisor, it's a bit like being the Wi-Fi router for a business. You're invisible when you're working really well, but everybody knows you're absolutely essential. The last thing you want is to be that person where people avoid coming to you, like you said at the beginning. Gosh, that is the one thing we don't want. We want to know all things that go on in order to see, are they friction points that we can resolve? Is that something in the way we're delivering it? Have I really understood how they want to receive the information?
Absolutely.
And I've had one C-suite person was very interesting because they said, I just want 3 bullets.
100%.
I said, the deal is over $200 million and you want 3 bullets on the risks. And I was sweating, I will admit it, because how do you explain something in just 3 bullets? And you're wondering, does that mean 3 very long bullet paragraphs to try and get them through? But then you realized this person has seen it all at this point. So they just want, if you just say it's termination, it's IP, and it's, I don't pick something like pricing or something like that, and they'll go, got it, thanks. And if they've got a question, they'll follow up. But you don't give them.
That's why God invented appendices, right? Right. I mean, give them the 3 bullets, and then you can attach God knows how many pages behind it to cover yourself and cover them if they end up wanting to dive into detail. But knowing how people want to be communicated to, I think, is incredibly respectful. And I think lawyers in-house could do a much better job of instructing their external counsel in the same thing. right? Way too many
Thank you.
in-house lawyers that I work with spend insane amounts of time translating what they get from their outside counsel into that business speak. So I would say demand that your external counsel deliver you something that's already pre-packaged in the way your CEO wants to see it. And, yes, now, of course, we have all kinds of AI tools that could do that. So it's unacceptable for anyone to be delivering work that doesn't align to those sorts of make it easy on my user principles.
I agree. I think I find it funny because if you're in a position, to my listeners, if any of them are in the position when you finally say yes and you get this shock face reaction to you, obviously you need to be working a little bit harder with them, because somebody said to me, it's a bit like that strict aunt at the party suddenly offering you tequila. Everybody's going to be totally confused, slightly suspicious, but also very, very excited. So you don't want them to be in that position. You want them to say it's a natural flow. We're working together. We're business partners, not one step removed. And I think
absolutely,
we kind of struggle sometimes because we have our ethical obligations, which requires us to be objective and slightly removed sometimes from the business. But that doesn't mean we can't be, I suppose, more involved. And I've used your word collaborative.
Yeah. And I think involved at what point? A big problem I see is the lawyers get involved too late. They get involved after decisions have already de facto been taken, and they're being asked to bless something that they had no input on, right? And it creates enormous friction and rework and cost when that happens, because sometimes they are put in a position where they have to say no. Whereas if they had the opportunity to influence things early on, just a slight, 20-degree shift to the left could have, and, help the team end up in a very different spot that was actually ethically okay, or, was in compliance with whichever regs you were thinking about. And so early involvement is really key, but early involvement means helping to shape, not shutting down.
Very important word, shape, not shutting down. Yes. If that kind of move through where instead of being legal says no, you become the strategic enabler. That's progress. But as you say, if you're not in the room, then the big decisions will happen without you. And you're basically a person who's shouting advice through a letterbox. You're just not getting heard enough. It's there. They can hear something in the background, but are we going to pay attention? We're not sure. And influence, I believe at this point, starts with access. But it won't end there. So for those, and I've had people who have messaged me now since I started this podcast, and they've said, how will I get in to that room or get to that seat at that table? And my answer to them is partly how you shape that. And it's not an easy fix, because there are valid reasons why you're not there, and there's commercial reasons why they don't need you at every single meeting. We have to respect that. But then there's the other question I have is, well, once you're there, what are you going to do?
Absolutely.
So what do you think, what concrete actions help lawyers to earn their place in a strategic discussion? And once they're in the room or at their seats, how can they communicate in a way that shapes decisions rather than just reacting to them?
And, and this is exactly when we wrote our book, Smarter Collaboration for In-House Legal Teams, we divided it into getting a seat at the strategy table and using the seat effectively, right? Because those are two different sets of actions for sure. One thing I'd like to do is plug a set of ideas in a very recently released book by one of my former students. He was an LLM at Harvard Law School, super brilliant guy called Marco Imperiali. And Marco has just published a book on legal design. And I think it would really behoove a lot of lawyers, in-house, external, you name it, to get their hands on this book. Legal design really helps get people thinking about perspective taking. And how do you, as a lawyer, take the point of view of somebody who hasn't had legal training, who doesn't have the same sets of professional accountabilities, et cetera, and begin to empathize with why they're acting like they are. Why are they speaking like they are? Why are these decisions coming across to you as so foreign? Chances are these are pretty smart, rational people. They're just trained really differently, and they have different goals and priorities. And the legal design thinking really helps get people incredibly practical tools for putting that new perspective into place and things like speaking their language comes much more naturally then. Beyond this, what can people do to have influence? I would say understanding not just their perspective and their motivation, both of which are crucial starting points, but also signaling where your boundaries are and why. Right. So once you understand where they're coming from, acknowledging that, and where necessary, being transparent about where there is a gap between what it is that you're trying to accomplish. It's a little bit like the political arena. Everybody purports to want to have a better country. It's just the way they get there could be very, very different.
Yeah.
And I think our dialogue would be much richer and more constructive if we started from the point of acknowledging some of those differences and then tried to figure out, given the shared ground that we've got, how are we going to get there? Right? Because there's got to be a path. And that kind of influence is crucial. Being able to recognize when those differences are truly worth fighting about is clear. When too many people, I think, put ego into this and it becomes a battle of wills as opposed to a strategic imperative. Do you really need to fall on your sword this time? And sometimes the answer is yes, but it better be absolute life or death necessity if that's true.
I like that. I think, you have to be strategic in your questions. I always think that for those who are just joining a board first time or any leadership meeting, the importance is to maintain curiosity. Ask as many questions as you can. Once you first join the table, you're allowed many, many questions. At some point, you're not allowed because you should know the answer, right? So just be careful. But it was one friend of mine, she later became a CEO, and she always said that she gave herself about the first 90 days to ask every stupid question possible. But it's all from a basis of really trying to be curious about how everything works, how people work, what they do, what's their role, what are their pain points, what are their objectives, their goals, where are they going? And if there was any terminology used, ask. Don't make the assumption that you know, which is for lawyers, their pride, their ego. I love you said ego. Really can get in the way of a lawyer's mindset. So just leave that at the door, because honestly, there's going to be a ton of things you won't know or understand, and that's okay.
I think to complement what you're saying, I would offer a couple of suggestions. One is be careful who you ask, right? Because frankly, not everybody can be trusted to give a straight answer or to provide the psychological safety and not use your questions against you. So be thoughtful and tactical about what you ask to whom, as well, to try to do your homework and make it obvious that you have done your homework. So I find a quote unquote naive question lands so much better in a boardroom or whichever, high stakes environment when somebody grounds it in, I've read this and that, and it led me to this question. And it can still be the same question, but if you just ask the question straight out, it can sound pretty naive. And it's a lot more respectful when you signal to people that you're not wasting their time by giving you the primer. You've done your homework and it sparked some questions which are important.
I agree. The only thing that came to my mind was just an example where supporting an in-house team in just reviewing some procurement exercises, and the board had come to a conclusion they would go with not the cheapest supplier, but they would go with one that seemed to have all the bells and whistles. I call it in a previous episode the shiny object syndrome. They were kind of dazzled by the very slick presentation, and the dashboards looked amazing, and it would solve a multitude of issues that they were trying to resolve, and it was at an okay price. So it was ticking all their boxes. My concern was something very simple, which was, okay, so this whole procurement exercise stemmed because of a regulator's investigation. So if you go with this supplier, and based on what you've committed around workarounds, mitigations, and all these things, you said it'll never happen again, regulator, we're all good. Will this supplier stand up to scrutiny if the regulator comes knocking? And that was just a random question in my head, but I said it just on the basis that this is because it came from how we presented, or how they rather presented, the workarounds and the mitigations in the past from the damage that was caused. And the regulator was satisfied with them in the past. Would they still be satisfied if the same thing happens again with a new supplier? And that question, which I didn't realize had so much weight, that it ultimately they decided to go in a different direction because they realized there wasn't enough to risk annoying the regulator, because they got off with a rap on the knuckles this time round, but in the future it may not be so pretty. So it was a very simple question, but it came from a genuine concern, but more of a, just in case you hadn't questioned it, this is what you have to do. So just asking the question in the right way means you're not pointing fingers at anybody who was trying to push for this particular supplier or did all of the work or the due diligence. And because you have to be mindful that somebody out there won't be thrilled that we're going to have to extend this meeting by another 10 minutes just to talk through something that they want to get home instead for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the other important consideration for somebody who's joining, say, a board for the first time is what happens behind the scenes. And so my colleague, Professor Randall Peterson, and I wrote a Harvard Business Review article called Back Channels in the Boardroom. And we investigated how people create coalitions and pre-wire decisions prior to a board meeting. And we were inspired to write this. I had read a piece of research showing that in this case, they were asking about women board members. And this was research conducted at a time when some of the European countries had initiated quotas and there were more women entering the boardroom than ever before. And they, some researchers surveyed their male counterparts and asked them to describe the effect that these women had in the boardroom. And the word they used was disruptive. And they didn't mean it in a positive, disruptive innovation kind of sense. And so we decided to dig in and find out what was going on and what to do to make it more constructive. And what we found out is that the newcomers to the board, again, in this case, it was women, didn't understand that the questions they were asking had already been decided ahead of time, right? And they thought they were doing their job by asking these probing questions and challenging some strategic thinking, et cetera. And it was incredibly disruptive, possibly for the best, but it was taken in very much the wrong way because it became a political challenge to what had already happened in the back channels. And so a lot of people joining boards don't realize how active that behind the scenes work is, how actively the chair and perhaps, committee chairs and others are going to be canvassing people and influencing them so that by the time there's ostensibly a debate in the boardroom, it's a bit more performative than anything else.
I agree.
I think it's inevitable that some of those back channels happen, and there are ways that we write about to make them far more inclusive and constructive and helping the board reach better decisions and fewer negative outcomes. And it's really crucial to understand that dynamic when you're entering a board for the first time.
It did draw me to an example I had with one company. So there was always a pack prepared for what needs to be decided at the board level. There's obviously a lot of material that's presented well in advance. And a team that was presenting their information was just going to create their deck and they're going to just send it off. And then it was just going to read. And I said, no, we were actually getting coaching at the time. I was at the most junior level, but we were coaching with senior people who said, no, you need to look at these areas because this is what they're most interested in. So you need to change your deck to focus on these areas. You go, oh, you're madness because we've spent hours and hours and hours trying to get it to be perfect. And now you want to change it all up. But it was correct to change it and it was correct to reevaluate it. And then when we sent it through, you go, then you present and then you're asking questions. You might get one question. You thought you'd get 1,000, but you get one. And then you left and you go, why was there only one question? It was quite straightforward as a question. I said, because they've all done their homework.
Yeah.
They all know their deal. They all know what they're looking for. You answered all the questions before they had to be asked. They were impressed that you took the time to give them what they want, not what you thought they need. So you weren't being arrogant or condescending to them. You were actually giving them exactly what they need. And you were respectful of their time to do that. So the question that you got was, although random to us, was just the final question that just said, okay, that sounds right. We'll approve, move, next. I go, but we spent hours. Yes, you spent hours to do a brilliant job that got you the result you were looking for, all because you took the coaching that was given to you well in advance. And I always say, so do your homework.
Without a doubt.
But this is what I always think is that right now for a lot of legal teams, they're considered the cost center. In some ways, it's like you're being invited to dinner, but you're told you're going to comment on the cutlery. But when you bring in this legal collaboration that you're mentioning, I think it will speed up the deals and it prevents reputational damage and suddenly you become the sommelier of strategy. took me a while to think that one up. But anyway, I was quite proud of that. Sommelier strategy. Don't say that too fast. But because in the room, you have to speak up, but it's always kind of suggestions for lawyers that we have to say something because there has to be something recorded in the minutes that says I was talking. And I have a little gripe with that because it's more of what you said. You have to question, should I ask the question? And should the question be asked by me? And should it be asked now? And just because you have a voice doesn't mean you have to use it in the meeting. Because if you've done everything in advance and spoken to all the right people to help them inform their decision of the legal implications of whatever you want them to be aware of, then you don't need to talk. Am I simplifying this too much?
No, I think you're not in the right context.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be contexts where if somebody is only operating behind the scenes, they don't get the credit they deserve because somebody else takes it from them, right? And so people need to be a bit mindful of the context they're operating in. And if that backseat driving gets them the credit that they need, fantastic, right? Because oftentimes it is far more effective in terms of the ultimate outcome to have the influence behind the scenes and to let somebody take the glory. But people need to be careful that that doesn't have ramifications for their career and promotion and so forth.
Got it. So if we look at saying, so we've got the seat at the table and it's ideally one that doesn't wobble or you face the fire exit, but you've done the part of it and we've talked about it. So that's the hard part comes saying something doesn't actually, saying something that doesn't make the CFO check their watch or the head of sales start doodling on their pad. What we need to do is we need to ensure that the legal advice can sometimes fall flat because you haven't provided context. And you've written about the power of psychometrics and data storytelling. So how can lawyers, I really want to hear this bit because I've always kind of fascinated by these, I would say it, nerdy elements because I just love it. But from your perspective, though, how can lawyers use these tools to translate the legal advice into business strategy? And do you have any examples of this shift?
Oh, absolutely. So the psychometric tool that we developed from scratch, I mean, we had 8,000 or 10,000 people who had participated in our research. And based on what we learned about their behaviors, both collaborative and we call them anti-collaborative behaviors in the business world, we were able to distill and then statistically validate 7 different dimensions of collaboration. In other words, what are the ways that people operate basically when they're not thinking about it? How do they engage with other people? And 4 of those dimensions relate to the way they think when they're collaborating, and 3 of them relate to the interpersonal dynamics. So getting specific. One of them is about the kinds of problems and thinking that people enjoy. One might be at the extreme, a complex thinker, somebody who loves ambiguity and theory and philosophy and, really big picture. And they're often very, very creative. The complete opposite on that dimension is a concrete thinker. They are very practical. They like the how-tos. They like roadmaps. They like next steps. They're real doers, and they think in very concrete terms about these issues. If you want to innovate, for example, you need both kinds of thinkers in the room. Right? You need the big creative types and the concrete thinkers who put that blue sky thinking into action. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of crazy ideas, right? I mean, that's what you have when you have only complex thinkers. So both kinds of thinkers are essential for innovation, and yet they often tend not to work terribly well together. They're a bit dismissive of people who are either, pie in the sky or, down in the weeds, or, they have ways of describing kind of the other that isn't constructive and flattering.
That's an interesting one because I could see there's lots of people, but then can I ask, is there a middle person across all of this that can actually help translate or bridge this?
Exactly. And, and on our scales, when people take this, it's like a 10-minute online self-assessment. And when people take that, they might end up at one of those extremes. They might end up balanced in the middle, which means they're context dependent and they flex quite naturally along that spectrum. So bringing this back to what you were saying, how do you use your seat at the strategy table effectively? If you are aware of your tendency to speak in these big, lofty ideas, and it makes complete sense to you to connect all of these disparate pieces in your mind, it's just, brilliant and beautiful. You have to think about whom you're speaking to. If you're talking to, somebody in operations, what are you on about, right? I mean, and so being self-aware about what your natural tendency is crucial because it brings an understanding that there is the opposite. And that is just as productive, just as rational, just as normal for collaboration as the way you operate. And being able to switch gears and say, hang on, I'm talking to Rory. He's a really concrete thinker. I need to do something to communicate my crazy, wild ideas in a way that he understands. Maybe I draw a diagram. Maybe I force myself to come up with 3 bullet points as opposed to, and for influence, we have to be able to take the point of view of whomever we're trying to influence and then meet them where they're at. And that's a very sophisticated way of operating. We also have to think about these other 6 dimensions. I won't go through all of them, but knowing where you sit and having a good sense ahead of time, really kind of doing some of the people reading to imagine, is the person I'm speaking to a risk seeker? They're always out there on the cutting edge. They don't want to miss any opportunity, or a risk spotter who's more inclined to think about mitigating the downside. How do I have to describe this? Is it glass half full or half empty? And when you go in with that approach, it allows you to be so much more influential because you're not putting people on, their back foot. You're really being able to communicate with them in ways that they understand, they trust. It demonstrates respect for the way they think and the way they collaborate. And, really in a team or a board setting, having people take these psychometric tests and be clear and transparent with one another. Hey, look, we are all I'm working with a big insurance company right now, and their top 65 executives are really, really skewed on the one dimension. They're all what we call catalysts, right? They're all people who love being the first one to raise their hand and to jump in first and be incredibly proactive, et cetera. And the culture has somehow devalued people who are the refiners, the ones who actually carry ideas through and make them better and don't need to be out in front. And so having the data or, at least strong intuition about where the group skews and how imbalanced it is on different dimensions allows you to make friction points more obvious. It allows you to pinpoint the reason behind them and then tackle them so you can get on with the real work.
I really like this, and I'm hoping the listeners were also getting this as well, because this is kind of like a deeper dive and a more up-to-date version of the old-fashioned social styles training that we had to do back when. It was probably 10, 15 years ago. But this is more comprehensive, more thoughtful, and mindfulness around your interaction with people and how to influence them effectively is to meet them where they're at. And to try and to adapt, which I think lawyers are very, very good at doing, those that get out of their own way, shall I say. But it's interesting because we're talking about the styles and the I will say, just to everybody who's heard this before, I did do a psychometric test when I was in my early 20s, and for a particular position I was going for, and it came back, I'll admit this to you, Heidi, it came back as inconclusive. I don't know what that meant, but it must mean that I think the reality was, you don't have to psychoanalyze me right now, but the idea was quite simple, was I interrogated the question too much. Rather than
you gamed the system.
I don't know what I was doing. I don't think they knew what I was doing. But ultimately, I thought it was quite funny that basically just said, no, sorry, Rory. But who knows what it would say these days. But I'm also want to move into the area because you see this across, because you've worked with so many amazing individuals and clients that you can see, you can talk from different angles and to talk at length. So I'm sorry to all listeners, we don't have hours with Heidi, but I would like to talk now about the new normal, what we're talking about new normal, because legal teams now are under a lot of pressure to do more with less. And we've got AI reshaping workflows, and that's not just in legal, it's across all businesses. And for in-house counsel, they are now being tasked to evolve from being a reactive support function into a proactive business partner. And it's the new normal. So it's like a firmware update that we're asking from our legal teams. And for some people, I've heard from universities that the new cohort of lawyers coming through are anxious about what the future of law looks like, what the future lawyers or attorneys' job is to be in the future, because it's all shifting and changing with the sands. And I said, well, it's always been changing, and just get comfortable with change. But back to you as just like, what do you think we should be doing to future-proof legal teams? So what would this all look like, do you think?
So we did a case study with Heineken's in-house legal team, and it was fascinating to understand how their general counsel and the chief legal innovation officer, a number of other legal leaders in Heineken, were using the opportunity of technology innovation to take a much more strategic, proactive role throughout the company. And so we're actually still working with Heineken and doing a new case study with them to understand how they have harnessed some innovations in legal tech and AI to empower the business and create opportunities for the legal team to take on more and more sophisticated work and essentially equip the business to be self-sufficient in places where the legal team used to spend inordinate amounts of time and now can turn their attention to things that are more value add. And so in writing this case study and researching the new one, we're seeing a few real important advances when it comes to technology. One thing that's really surprising is that the use of AI is often improving not only efficiency, which is what it was meant to do when first, installed, but also improving human to human interaction, which I find fascinating. So when teams are using AI in various supportive ways and being transparent about the way they use it, it actually helps them increase the level of challenge and debate within a team. We think it's because people are slightly less precious about work that they've had technology support with. They become, sort of less territorial about that because they've already had quote unquote inputs and feedback and, several rounds of edits with somebody who isn't just their own mind. And so it allows them to take critique on board a bit less defensively, which has opened up channels for much improved debate and discussion. So that was a surprising finding to us that AI, while it was meant simply to eke out time savings and cost savings, has changed the interactions when teams are coming together and interacting just human to human.
I have not heard that one before. And I'm actually pleased because there has been a lot of uncertainty, or at least at a lot of the conferences I've been at and speaking with a lot of different clients and parties, the view has always been that, concern is that AI will reduce the critical thinking required of a lawyer in order to deliver, say, a contract update. Because they'll just say, here's the playbook, now go off and update it, and it churns out and spits out something. And then the other side takes that, plays it against its own playbook and spits out something back. And you kind of say, well, we could easily just cut out the two humans in the process and just let the AI tools talk to each other and figure out what is the common denominator between the two, which is not necessarily actually the right answer, by the way. So just to be clear. And a lot of people said, yes, but then the worry for graduates coming through is that by using those tools, they don't get to look under the hood as to why the language was shaped in that way. Why did we put in just that one word? We all know the word best endeavors, reasonable endeavors, all reasonable endeavors. They haven't interrogated why that's so important here, but not elsewhere. And they've just allowed the tool to do it for you. What it's interesting is that now you're telling me is that if we challenge that, which I always encourage lawyers to challenge whatever their thinking is, even if something's been done for years, doesn't mean that's the rule of law that stays in situ forever, amen. It's always open to challenge. That's the excitement of law. So I would say this is very interesting because it encourages the debate that we want to have amongst our peers to challenge our thinking or check our thinking. And I haven't heard that before. I'm really pleased to hear that, Heidi. I just really am.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We also have done some work amongst our smarter collaboration team looking at really fruitful ways to bring AI in basically as a collaborative team member. And, looking around our group, if there were some of us, 5, 6 of us sitting around a table and we're supposed to do some problem solving on some business issue, we could look at our group and try to identify some gaps. For example, like that profile that I mentioned, right? If you've got all people who are complex thinkers there, you might want to have a bot sitting at the table with you that is prompting you every so often about the practicalities. Do you have the budget? Do you have the resource? Do you have the time, et cetera? So you can identify gaps in the ways that people think and the way they work together, and the bot can help you keep on track that way. You can also fill in functional gaps, right? You could, plug in, here's everything we need to know about consumer behavior, and now help us think through in this product development meeting, some other angles on that. Or it could be, somebody from a particular country or a demographic, the customer mindset. There's lots of ways that we can think about programming and using an AI tool to help broaden our mind and make sure that we are not missing a critical perspective, again, from that early stage. Because yes, we can always go back and, test out our ideas and focus group them and blah, blah, blah. But wouldn't you rather get the input early on before you've invested so much time in, polishing to the nth degree? And it sounds like that was your experience with that board deck you were talking about as well, right? I mean, making sure that you're getting the right kinds of inputs and challenge and debate early on to optimize something at the right point in time before you've taken it too far. And I mean, you gave that great example. It really was tremendously effective. In that case, it was humans doing that work. I think now there's opportunities for AI to do that work.
I agree. Now, if we're talking about the agility and the AI piece, let's not forget the human piece. Because behind every strategic enabler is someone quietly Googling how to look confident while internally panicking. But so I want to go behind the briefcase. I want to talk about the high-stake roles that come with the stress, the doubt, and sometimes reinvention. And so how do legal professionals navigate imposter syndrome and burnout? And I appreciate, before you write in, that some people don't believe imposter syndrome exists. I get it. And I'm going to leave everybody to make their own decision whether it does or doesn't exist. But assuming that there is some merit to the imposter syndrome, or very much the burnout system, which we can see across the profession, what habits help professionals to stay grounded when they're climbing higher?
One critical piece, and there's lots of psychological and neuroscience behind this thinking, is to identify where you can really truly make a difference and lean into those positions, lean into those skills, lean into that passion, and do what a colleague of mine, Amy Wisniewski at Yale Business School, has written extensively about job crafting and thinking about, how to take what seems like a given, the job that you have to do, and critically analyzing it, breaking it into some components, and figuring out which ones you really are best placed to handle, and finding people who are complementary, who are just as excited about the other things, the ones that you put on your discard pile. They're the ones that they would pick up and run with. And so, I'll give a personal example. I do a lot of writing in my job. I have to write for all different kinds of outlets and so forth. And the thing I hate is starting with a blank page. I really do. I just find it paralyzing. On the other hand, if I can start with even an incredibly messy outline or draft or something, it just gets the ideas flowing, and then I can, I can hammer everything out, and I love that part of it. And it turns out that, one of the people that I work with is a former journalist, and she looks at a blank page and she thinks it's freedom. She loves starting with the blank page, and that's her real forte. And so it works for us that we'll have a super quick brainstorming meeting, 5 minutes on the phone, And all of a sudden she's writing, and it comes back to me. And I look at it and I turn it inside out, upside down, and sideways. And I realize all the things that are missing and that duplicate it. And I love that part. And then I can hand it back to her and she puts finishing touches on it. But we're really playing to the pieces where we feel energized and like we're bringing our best self. And if I hadn't decomposed the writing task into those different pieces, then, I would still be here suffering with the blank page. And, now we've actually got 3 people. Actually, the person I turn it back to for polishing is somebody different altogether. And that's what she loves. And so we were able to take that job and craft it in ways that we are all really excited about. And I think it reduces our stress and anxiety and burnout because we can do a better job in less time and have more fun at it. So that's one, simple way that we can think about the burnout problem and what can we do rather than accepting our job as is. We have more agency, and I think we should be accountable for applying that agency to make it better for ourselves and for other people around us.
I agree. I think that the world of work has changed dramatically over the years. I think back in the day of my parents, it would be you just do what you're told and that's it. You turn up, get the work done and go. And if you've got an issue with your job, don't worry, somebody else will take it and move on. I think we are now more open to realizing purpose and value in the work that you do. And yes, you have to do the admin tasks. And yes, to all the lawyers, you're still going to have to use spreadsheets and you're going to have timesheets and record everything. And you're going to have to obviously build into those metrics. You can't outsource everything before you start doing it. Although I have heard a few urban stories around outsourcing to other countries to do their legal work and then claiming it as their own. But I do like the idea that you're collaborating within your team, not just in the performance, but also for your well-being as well, which is very, very nice. So thank you for that. Now, before we wrap, I do have 2 questions that I always ask my guests, and I have to ask you as well. What's something people often get wrong about the work you do?
Oh, gosh, that's so easy. We wrote the last part of our Smarter Collaboration book is all about the pitfalls of collaboration. And the one I think I'd lean into is over collaboration, over commitment. Some people make the mistake of thinking that if collaboration is good, more collaboration is better and more and more and more is the best. And that's dead wrong. It's why we talk about smarter collaboration. The smarter piece of that is being hyper intentional and decisive about where collaboration of the kind we're talking about will make a real impact and when it's better just to crack on and do it yourself. And so more collaboration isn't better. Smarter collaboration leads to results.
Exactly why it's called Smarter Collaboration. It reminds me of, what was it? So I married a personal trainer and always said, you can eat in moderation, but don't eat too much. So you can eat your fruit. And they said, but I'm eating lots of fruit. I said, yeah, and you're putting on weight because you're eating too much fruit. So you need to step back and be a bit more smarter is the word I'll now apply. Thank you for that. And last question, what's one thing you genuinely find fun about your work? And please don't say what everybody says to the people, because everybody says the people. Oh, she had to say the people.
No, but. Here's what it is. I like people who challenge my thinking. So I have stepped away from teaching our degree programs. And I have to say this super cautiously because I used to teach the MBA program at Harvard Business School. I used to teach the JDs and LLMs at Harvard Law School. And these are some of the smartest kids on the planet, right? But they're by definition quite inexperienced because they're early in their careers. And what I found is, given the nature of the work that I do, I want to teach the executives, people who have the battle scars, people who have failed, people who realize that for them, the people is the problem. It's not the joy, because they've failed to motivate. They've failed to do all the sorts of things that, wacky, crazy human beings as we are with all our foibles and egos and everything else don't behave according to the books. And so I like to have those people as my clients. I like to have those people in my executive classroom, in the trainings that I do, because they challenge me with all kinds of crazy scenarios that I haven't personally experienced, or maybe I have, some flavor of it, but not exactly. And they're the ones who are the best for me because they force me to think and continually innovate this idea of smarter collaboration. Rory, I've been researching this topic now, depending how you think about it, but really I trace its origins back to 2002 when I left McKinsey and started my PhD program, right? So, it's been more than 2 decades I've been working on this body of work. And the only thing that keeps it fresh is that I keep getting brilliant questions and challenged by people who haven't yet cracked what we're trying to do here. And it forces me to innovate and find more and more practical ways to help embed these concepts and turn them from ideas into action.
What I'd like to say to my listeners is if you could see Heidi, you could see how her face has lit up with just saying all of that. And it truly is genuinely obvious to me that this is something that really you do find fun. So thank you for that. I really do appreciate that. But Heidi, honestly, thank you very much for such a rich and energizing conversation. I know you've given our listeners not just ideas, but a framework for action. And for anybody who wants to go deeper, Smarter Collaboration should be on your essential reading list, especially for legal teams ready to shift from a cost center to competitive advantage. And to my listeners, I firstly want to say thank you to everybody who's been writing in with all your kind words. I'm very humbled for all your support. And for those who sent in their ideas as well for future episodes, thanks for those too. I have them on my list. But to everybody, and especially to Heidi, thank you very much. Until next time, stay curious, stay healthy, and keep stepping beyond the fine print. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Fine Print. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss the next episode. And if you have any burning questions you want us to cover in a future episode, send them to beyondthefineprint@rmoklegal.com. See you next time.